Supreme Court is currently in session, but with just 8 justices. In this week's Know the Law segment, Tom Sinas is here to talk about how the court operates and how this vacancy is affecting it.
Fascinating issue. We hear about it all the time in the news. In order to really understand it, let's unwind it. What is the Supreme Court? Well, we all know it's the highest court of the land. What kind of cases do they hear? Because they don't just hear any case.
Right.
They hear cases that deal with constitutional law, okay, and then they hear cases that deal with federal law. So most of the cases on the court's docket deal with interpretations of federal law, but then there are other cases that deal with state law that affects the United States Constitution. So criminal cases, for example. Those cases affect amendments to the Constitution often, and that's what gives the Supreme Court, as we say, jurisdiction. And so that's what the Supreme Court is. The other thing to remember is it's an appellate court. That means it's not a place where you go and try your case.
It has to be appealed.
That's right. Witnesses don't appear in front of the United States Supreme Court. What they're deciding are legal questions, purely legal questions. And those questions they're started in cases that start at the trial court level and they work their way up through the appellate chain, and at the very, very top of the appellate chain is the United States Supreme Court. So how do the justices get to that spot in the United States Supreme Court? Well, as everybody I think knows, they're appointed by the President of the United States. They have to be confirmed by the United States Senate. If they're appointed and confirmed, they can remain on the bench for the rest of their life. They don't run for re-election. They don't come up for another confirmation. Only if they commit a very serious crime could they ever be removed from the bench.
Which is why we're seeing such a political argument about who appoints judges, is because they're there for life. They're going to have a lasting ramification. That's
right, and that's very different than what we have in, say, the state court system, where even the Michigan Supreme Court, those justices are elected. So the United States Supreme Court, the people who are appointed, can sometimes be in that Supreme Court justice seat for 10, 20, 30 years. Right? Now, the Supreme Court's made up of 9 justices, and there's a reason why there's 9. It has to be an odd number, right? Because you have to have a tiebreaker. We have 8 right now. So that means that if a case gets to the Supreme Court and 4 agree and 4 disagree, what happens?
Just gets pushed?
Well, what happens is the lower court ruling, meaning the appellate court below the Supreme Court, that ruling stands. It's almost as if the Supreme Court never acted on that case, because they've got 4 people who agree and 4 people who disagree, and so they have to go back to the Court of Appeal below and say, well, your decision stands. So what's happening right now in the vacancy is that cases that are making their way through the Federal Court of Appeals, if they go to the Supreme Court and it's a 4-4 vote, then it's the Federal Court of Appeals decision that remains the law of the land until we get that 9th justice.
Interesting. It sounds like that's coming after the election.
It's going to have to come eventually. I mean, the only way the court's going to work is if you have an odd number of justices, and we've got 9, and that's the way the Constitution's supposed to work. So eventually we're going to have to fill this seat. We can't live in limbo forever. Hey,
if somebody has a legal question they want answered, they've been in an accident, they have something that they're dealing with insurance-wise, they can call your office.
Anytime. 616-301-3333 is the number in Grand Rapids. You can find us online at www.sinasdramis.com. or send us an email at info@sinasdramis.com.
Tom, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Christian.